Everyone has a past. Some parts we're proud of and some we wish we could erase. But what happens when someone brings up your past just to hurt you, to make you feel small, guilty, or ashamed? That's when emotional control becomes power, because the way you respond in that moment can either feed their control or take it back completely. People use your past when they can't handle your present. It's not really about what you did back then, it's about what you've become now. When someone brings up your old mistakes, your bad choices, or moments you wish you could erase, it's often because your growth reminds them of what they haven't changed in themselves. You've evolved, you've matured, and that can be uncomfortable for people who are still stuck in the version of themselves that you've outgrown. It's easier for them to point fingers at who you were than to face who they still are. Some people need to pull you backward because they can't keep up with you moving forward. They want to remind you of your past because it makes them feel safer, more in control, and less exposed in their own lack of growth. When they see you doing better, changing your patterns, setting boundaries, speaking differently, or carrying yourself with more confidence, it challenges their perception of you and, more importantly, their perception of themselves. People who can't handle your growth will try to shrink it by anchoring you to your history. It's a quiet form of insecurity disguised as judgment. They'll bring up things you've already owned, apologized for, or moved past, not because they want to talk about it, but because they want to keep you small. When someone says, "You used to be this," or "I remember when you did that," they're really saying, "I can't handle who you've become without feeling less about who I am." They need you to stay the version of yourself that made them comfortable. They don't know how to relate to the stronger, wiser, more grounded you standing in front of them now. So instead of rising to meet you, they reach backward to pull you down. And that's where emotional maturity becomes your power. You can't stop people from bringing up your past, but you can stop letting it define your response. When you know who you are now, the past stops being a weapon and starts being just a story. You take away their ability to control the narrative by owning it yourself. People who can't handle your present will always look for a place to attack you where you no longer live. That's why staying calm and unshaken in those moments matters, because it proves something silently powerful, that the person they're trying to talk to doesn't exist anymore. When you've grown, healed, and evolved, the past doesn't sting the same. It's not shame anymore, it's history. It's proof of where you've been, not a reflection of where you're going. And the ones who try to hold it over you will start to realize something they didn't expect. Their words don't work anymore. The reaction they were hoping for isn't there. The control they thought they had has disappeared because you've changed the rules. You no longer fight to prove your worth against an outdated version of yourself. You simply live in your present, fully aware that your growth speaks louder than their reminders ever could. Owning your past removes its power over you. The truth is, what people use against you only works if you still feel ashamed of it. The moment you stop running from your past and start accepting it as part of your story, it loses its grip. You stop being triggered by it because you've already faced it, learned from it, and made peace with it. People can only weaponize what you're still hiding. When you bring it into the open and say, "Yes, that happened. Yes, I did that. Yes, I was that person," you take away their ammunition. You turn what used to be your weakness into your strength. It's not about denying what you've done. It's about owning who you've become since then. Growth doesn't erase the past, it transforms it. Every mistake, every failure, every bad choice becomes part of the story that built your strength, not the evidence that breaks your reputation. When you own your past, you stop fearing judgment because judgment only hurts when it touches something unresolved inside you. Once you've accepted your story fully, other people's opinions sound small compared to the lessons you've lived. The same story that once embarrassed you becomes the reason you walk with quiet confidence. People can remind you of what you've done, but they can't make you feel small for it anymore. You've already done the work they think they're exposing. You've already stood in front of your mistakes and said, "This is who I was, and this is what I learned." And that kind of ownership is untouchable. It's what separates those who are stuck in denial from those who have truly evolved. The power in owning your past comes from honesty, not perfection. You don't have to pretend you always had it together. You don't have to rewrite your story to make it prettier. You just need to stand in it fully and say, this is me, unfiltered, flawed, and still standing. When people see that, they can't use your past as leverage anymore because you've already claimed it. You've turned it from a wound into a scar, and scars tell stories of survival, not weakness. The same people who try to shame you for your past will often go quiet when they realize you're not running from it. They expect guilt, excuses, or defensiveness, but instead you give them acceptance, peace, and self-awareness. That's how you win back your control without raising your voice. Owning your past means understanding that your mistakes don't define you. Your response to them does. It's not about what happened, it's about what you did afterward. You chose to grow, to evolve, to become more self-aware. You turned lessons into wisdom, pain into perspective, and regret into resilience. When you reach that level of ownership, no one can drag you back into who you were. They can talk about it all they want, but you'll stand there knowing you've already faced the hardest part, forgiving yourself. And once you've done that, the opinions of others lose all power to control you. Calm confidence always outshines emotional defense. The moment someone tries to throw your past in your face, they're not just testing your history, they're testing your composure. Most people fall into the trap of reacting immediately, raising their voice, trying to explain or justify themselves, because deep down they still feel the need to prove they've changed. But the truth is, the more emotional your reaction, the more power you hand them. They feed off your defensiveness because it shows they've hit a nerve. Calmness, on the other hand, is disarming. It's not passive, it's powerful. It sends a message that you're in control of yourself, not controlled by what's being said. When you stay calm, you're showing that their words don't define you and that your sense of peace doesn't depend on their approval. That's strength most people don't expect. Calm confidence doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've mastered the ability to care selectively. You know when something deserves your energy and when it doesn't. Someone bringing up your past to manipulate or shame you doesn't deserve it. That moment isn't about proving your worth. It's about protecting your peace. Calmness doesn't come from ignoring your emotions. It comes from understanding them. You recognize the old trigger. You feel the sting, but you don't let it steer your reaction. You've learned to pause before responding, to breathe before speaking, to choose clarity over chaos. That pause is where your power lives. It's the space between who you were and who you are now. The old version of you might have argued, yelled, or tried to win, but the new version knows that silence and steady tone carry far more authority. When you respond with calm confidence, you shift the entire tone of the interaction. The other person expects defensiveness, guilt, or emotional chaos, but when you remain grounded, you force them to confront the emptiness of their own argument. Your composure highlights their insecurity. It makes them uncomfortable because it exposes the fact that their attempt to hurt you failed. That's the real power of staying calm. It's not about looking unbothered. It's about being unshakable. You've already made peace with your past, so there's nothing left for them to use. Calmness communicates that you've done the internal work and that no external voice has the authority to rewrite your story. Confidence doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from knowing you don't have to. You don't need to over-explain, over-defend, or over-prove. Your growth speaks for itself, and your tone reflects it. You can acknowledge what's being said without reacting to it. You can say, yes, that was me, and stay steady, composed, and unapologetic. That steadiness is what people remember, not your past, but your presence. Calm confidence tells the world you've outgrown the need to convince anyone of who you are, and that's when your past finally loses its ability to shake you. You don't owe explanations to those who weaponize your history. The people who try to use your past against you aren't looking for understanding. They're looking for control. They're not asking questions to connect. They're asking to corner you. They want to pull you back into old guilt so they can feel justified in how they treat you. But maturity means recognizing when a conversation isn't about truth, it's about power. You don't have to defend every chapter of your story to someone who's already decided who you are. Explaining yourself to people who want to misunderstand you is like pouring energy into a hole that never fills. It's draining, it's endless, and it always ends with you feeling small. The more you try to explain, the more they twist your words to fit their version of events. That's why silence, boundaries, and self respect often speak louder than any explanation ever could. There's a difference between accountability and manipulation. Accountability happens when someone genuinely wants to understand, when they approach your past with curiosity and compassion. Manipulation happens when they use it as a weapon to shame or silence you. Knowing that difference is what protects your peace. You owe honesty to those who care about your growth, not explanations to those who are invested in your downfall. It's not your job to keep proving your evolution to people who are committed to seeing you through an outdated lens. Some people only remember the worst parts of your story because it serves their ego to keep you there. They don't want to see your progress because your progress challenges their narrative. So they'll keep poking, questioning, and bringing up old mistakes as a way to maintain control. When you recognize that pattern, your best response isn't defense, it's detachment. Refusing to explain yourself doesn't make you defensive, it makes you self-aware. It shows that you understand where your responsibility ends and theirs begins. You've already done the work of self-reflection, you've already made peace with your past, and that peace doesn't require external validation. You can acknowledge your history without giving anyone permission to use it against you. You can listen without feeling obligated to justify. You can walk away from conversations that no longer serve your growth. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say is nothing, because silence protects your energy from being twisted into someone else's weapon. You don't owe anyone emotional access to your healing process. Not everyone deserves the full story, especially those who only want to use it as ammunition. The more you explain, the more they feel entitled to your vulnerability. And when you stop explaining, they'll often accuse you of arrogance or avoidance because they can't manipulate what they no longer control. But the truth is, peace doesn't need defending. You're not hiding. You're simply choosing not to participate in a battle that doesn't move you forward. Growth isn't about convincing others that you've changed. It's about knowing you have, regardless of who believes it. Growth silences judgment louder than words ever could. You don't have to announce your change for it to be real, and you don't have to argue with people who can't see it. Real growth speaks through consistency, not conversation. The people who used to know your flaws will notice that the things that once triggered you no longer do. They'll see that you carry yourself differently, respond differently, think differently. You don't have to tell them you've evolved because your actions already do. There's a quiet kind of strength in letting your maturity speak for itself. It doesn't shout, it doesn't defend, it simply shows up differently. And over time, that consistency becomes undeniable. Judgment loses its volume when your life starts reflecting what your words never could. When people judge you for your past, they're not seeing the work you did behind the scenes. They didn't see the nights you stayed awake replaying mistakes, the effort it took to forgive yourself, or the courage it took to face the parts of you that needed changing. Growth isn't visible at first. It's invisible work that eventually turns into visible peace. That's why you don't need to waste time convincing anyone of your transformation. The ones who truly know growth can recognize it without you explaining it. The ones who judge you aren't listening for truth, they're looking for validation of their assumptions. So you stop performing for their approval. You stop trying to prove anything. You let your life become the proof. Every choice you make, every calm response, every boundary you set becomes a quiet message that you're not who you used to be. Growth has a way of making noise without saying a word. It changes your tone, your priorities, and your circle. It teaches you that some people will outgrow you and some will resent your growth because it highlights their stagnation. But you keep growing anyway. You keep walking forward without looking back for validation. The most powerful revenge against judgment is peace, not bitterness, not explanations, not anger, just peace. Because when you're truly growing, you stop fighting to be understood and start focusing on being aligned. You realize that judgment only sticks when you still believe part of it might be true. Once you've accepted yourself, judgment slides right off. Growth doesn't need an audience, it just needs consistency. Over time, the same people who doubted you will have no choice but to see it. They might not admit it, but they'll feel it. They'll notice how unbothered you've become, how sure you sound, how steady you move. And that's when silence becomes your loudest statement. You didn't have to argue, you didn't have to defend, you just had to keep showing up as the new version of yourself. Growth doesn't beg for recognition, it earns it through repetition. And when your actions stay consistent long enough, judgment starts to fade into the background, replaced by quiet respect, even from the people who once tried to hold you back.